Hello Punk Stars and welcome to the Rathole. I'm your host, Commissioner Zack Eichten. This week in NFL news, despite what is probably the safe thing to do, the NFL starts up for its first game this Thursday night between the Texans and the Chiefs. It's exciting stuff, and I know that we are all super pumped for football to just be back. It is crazy that it is during these crazy times. But let's get into fantasy football. In league news, Tuesday night was the night of our draft, which means we finally get to have a look at teams, and we get to talk about teams and the matchups that we're going to be seeing for this year. I'm going to go through each of the week one matchups in just a minute, but first, let me just say, great draft, folks. It was a lot of fun. It was a ton of fun getting to talk to most of you during the draft. I thought that worked very well. And I, for one, know I'm already looking forward to next year's draft. So mark your calendars now, based on our league rules. Our draft is the Tuesday after Labor Day, 7 p.m. Central on that day. So as September 7th, 2021, we will be drafting again. Now we had an abundance of trades just right around that trade deadline before the draft started, including some controversy with KEEPERGATE this year. But let's get into those trades more specifically. The first trade this year was between Thomas and Sam, where Thomas sent a 2020 first round pick and a 2020 third round pick for Zach's 2020 fourth round pick that Sam had on his in his draft picks, as well as James Conner, who Thomas did end up keeping after that trade. To then open up a spot for Conner to even be in the keeper squad at all, a nearly simultaneous trade happened with Lucas, where Thomas sent T.Y. Hilton in a 2020 second round pick for Lucas's 2020 first round pick, the third overall position, and Sam's 2020 fourth round pick. This did mean that Thomas had a first round pick and then did not draft again until the fourth round. Later in the day, a different trade occurred where Tony and Drew sent a whole bunch of picks back and forth, and instead of me wasting my breath recapping all of that, here's a nice graphic for you to look at. Good stuff. Glad you got a good look at that. But anyway, let's get into KEEPERGATE now, all right? KEEPERGATE. KEEPERGATE got underway the morning of the draft, the day after all of these trades went through. Where several things happened nearly simultaneously in the morning of the draft. First, team owner Tony Townsend was caught trying to sneak Josh Allen into the keeper lineup, despite that deadline having passed 2 weeks prior. Additionally, it was discovered that the commissioner had allowed for Sam to update his keepers after a trade with a player that was not previously marked as a keeper anywhere, Courtland Sutton, who was on Sam's bench at the time. Due to what the expectation was surrounding those trades, the commissioner issued what was expected to be a one-time ruling where Sam would get to update his keepers, and we would clarify after the draft for next season what the position of the league would be on being able to update keepers after the deadline. The issue seemed to be at rest. There seemed to be a lull until some blatant exploitation of the ruling came to a head with Lucas and Tony trading to open a spot for Tony to keep Josh Allen, despite that deadline for keepers having already passed. This resulted in an immediate calling for a league vote by team owners John Stevens and Drew Mahold, and the result of the vote that had to occur was that the two trades Thomas sent and accepted would stand, but that Sam would not be able to keep Courtland Sutton in his keeper lineup. The trade between the blatant exploiters, Lucas and Tony, was canceled after those rulings came out by the league. Long story short, everything worked out in the end, and thank you to the league for taking swift action before the draft tonight. And then the draft went off without a hitch, so it all turned out all right. An additional trade went through less than an hour after the draft between Tony and Josh. Josh traded away new running back to his team, DeAndre Swift, as well as a third and fifth round pick next year, 2021. And Tony traded away Todd Gurley, along with a pair of fourth round picks that he had in 2021 for the rookie DeAndre Swift. definitely an interesting trade, and one that will likely benefit both teams based on their current strategies going into this season. Now, this leads us to the fun fact of the week. Now, fun fact of the week this week is that there are already more trades this year, in this season, and more people in the league trading this year than the entirety of last season. And that's really fun. I hope that this trend continues, and we can get a lot of movement between teams for this year and beyond. Brennan, you're the only one who hasn't made a trade yet this year, so you might want to get on it so that you're not left out. All right, so let's get into a quick look at the Week 1 rankings. Take a minute to look at this graphic, really examine them, and ask yourself, does anybody really know what that is? Welcome, folks, to the Armchair Experts. Joining me this week are team owners John Stevens in person, as well as Noel Teigen down in South Dakota. Thanks to both of you for joining me for this week's segment of the Armchair Experts. This week, we're going to be talking about the draft recap and how we feel each team fared in the draft. We're going to go through an order based off of where folks were picking. We're going to talk about the best pick of that draft, the worst pick, as well as if they get a thumbs up or a thumbs down from us in this year's draft. So let's start with first overall, Tony Townsend. First overall in the draft, I should say. Tony Townsend. Obviously, he got to pick that consensus number one draft pick in our keeper draft, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the Clydesdale, as well as he made a whole bunch of weird trades with Drew to basically really screw up where he was picking the entire time. So I'm excited to see how you guys felt about that as well. I'll go first. It's hard to disagree with obviously the Clyde pick. That's got to be the overall best pick of the draft, but that's a consensus pick, and that's not a very fun pick for me to mention. My favorite pick that Tony was able to make this year was Marlon Mack in the 4-10 position. Marlon Mack, someone who Drew traded for last year in a big trade with you, John, a guy who was putting up a lot of points, and has obviously a rookie with Jonathan Taylor coming in to take some of those carries away. But the guy was a machine last year, and to get him this late in the draft, what is essentially a 9th round pick, I thought was a steal. The worst pick for Tony, and this is obviously me having prejudice, but is Jared Goff at the 8-10. Garbage fantasy quarterback. I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole, and is just no good. So that was my worst pick. Overall, though, I think Tony, based on what he was going for, as well as I know we're talking about draft, but the trade he made right after the draft to get DeAndre Swift to move forward as a keeper. Tony, compared to last year, gets a thumbs up from me. John, let's go to you.
Yeah, I'll also just come out and say right away that I thought Tony had a great draft. I definitely give Tony a thumbs up. Like you mentioned, Zach, thumbs up. Like you mentioned, Zach, Clyde in the first round. Obviously, it's a great pick. And I'm not gonna say that it was my favorite pick because it'd just be too obvious. My favorite picks that Tony made were his picks for tight end. I really like both the guys he picked up. Hunter Henry was a guy that I really wanted, and a guy that, frankly, I saw go off the board earlier than I thought would go, but I didn't disagree with how early he went because I really think he could have some really big games. And his backup tight end as well, and TJ Hawkinson, I thought was a great pick because when that guy's healthy, he's been very dynamic when he's been on the field. So I really like both the tight end picks from Tony. The biggest question mark for me, and it's not a question mark about the player, it's just when he was taken, was Henry Ruggs. I think Henry Ruggs is a phenomenal player, and he could potentially have an outstanding rookie season where he's going to be probably one of the top 2 targets in Oakland. But I think taking him in the 5th round was a little early for me. I was personally targeting him like late 7th, early 8th. So I think the value there might not have been the best. But if he performs well, it'll turn into a great pick. So yeah, overall, I thought Tony had a great draft.
Noel, let's go over to you. What do you think about Tony's draft going into the season here?
Yeah, so I would definitely agree with both of you guys. He gets a thumbs up this year, especially if we're comparing it to last year. He didn't, as we all know, he didn't play the best, but you live and you learn, and it looks like Tony learned. As you guys mentioned, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, best pick in the draft. We all knew that coming in, and so Tony picking him number 1 overall, not surprised. My favorite pick of his, I think it's going to be Henry Ruggs, John. He like you said, he was a little early, but I was hoping to get Ruggs in that 6th round, and Tony snagged him right before I was able to get him. And so I think that was a great pick for Tony, especially for Las Vegas, because Henry Ruggs is listed as a number 1 wide receiver. And although we don't know how they're going to perform, Gruden likes to air the ball out, it seems like. And so I think Henry Ruggs was a great pick for him. His worst pick, I think San Francisco 49ers in the 6th round. You don't need a defense that early, but we'll see how it works out for him. Maybe it'll be like a Patriots and score 25% of his points this year. But
maybe.
That'd be great. Let's move on to Sam then. So Sam drafting from the 2nd spot. Unfortunately for Sam, he had the worst possible outcome. He got the punishment, but also not that first overall pick last year. So he made some moves right before the draft. He ended up with the 2nd first-round pick. He ended up with Thomas's 2nd-round pick. But he was the only team that was not able to keep all 5 keepers after KEEPERGATE right before the draft began. So I think that let's have Noel go first this time. Let's reverse the order.
Sounds good. For me, Sam's worst pick was Latavius Murray in the 3rd round.
Yeah.
I think that's easy to say. As a handcuff running back, it's not a bad pick, especially as we've seen Kamara being injured quite often these past couple of years, but I don't think he needed to take him that early. Overall, though, I think he does get a thumbs up. Sam did a great job, much as Tony did, as improving their draft strategy. And I think Sam's best pick, for me, it's either Will Fuller or Evan Ingram in that 2nd or 3rd round. Just because Evan Ingram was a little early, and so I'm hesitant to give that his best pick. But if he stays healthy this year, we all saw what he's able to do in the first 8 weeks of the season last year. But Will Fuller, with Brandon Cooks being out this first week and potentially more with his concussion history, Will Fuller's going to get a lot of targets now that Hopkins is gone. And I think that was a great pickup in the 3rd round.
Absolutely, John. Let's head over to you.
Yeah, for Sam, I thought Sam's best pick was actually the pick that he traded up to get, which was Calvin Ridley with Thomas's pick. I really like that pick. I think that Ridley actually kind of slid a little bit technically by rankings, but I think, Sam knows how productive that Ridley can be. He was on his team last year, wanted to get him back. And the fact that he didn't have to use that 2nd overall pick to get him back, but he was able to use his later 1st rounder, I thought was great value. I think his worst pick, I'm going to point to a rookie wide receiver again. I just think it's a little too early for Justin Jefferson, especially being a non-Minnesota Vikings fan. I would understand if like Drew or Noel or Zach or any number of the Vikings fans here in Minnesota would have picked him that early, but I think it just seems a little early for me to take a rookie wideout. Ruggs is at least going to be the number 1 guy, but Jefferson is going to be the 2 probably at best. So we'll see how it pans out for him. I just felt it was a little early, but I do agree. I think that this was a good draft overall for Sam. I think he picked up some nice pieces, and his moves before the draft, I think, also helped him out. So give him a thumbs up.
Yeah, Sam gets a thumbs up from me for most of his draft as well. I really there's a lot to like, but a lot of it is some question marks for me still. I think it's going to work out well for Sam. But I think it was Noel. I have to agree with Noel. Worst pick for me was Latavius Murray in the 3rd round at the 3-2 position. That's just that is way too early when there's someone still like DeAndre Swift was still on the board at that point. A lead back in a system that he's should be a lead back at least in the system versus a handcuff to a guy. I know Sam was looking at headlines about Kamara maybe not playing, but I just don't put stock in those, and I don't think that was a great pick. But I'm gonna snag actually a second worst pick for Sam as well, and it's the 12-9. Why are you drafting 2 defenses, Sam? You had a golden opportunity to draft one of those last guys on the board. That I know there was a lot of receivers down there that I still really liked in that 11th round that I wasn't able to pick up because in the 10th and 11th I did grab a defense and a kicker still. Pick up another receiver there, my guy. What was that? So that was not good. But 2 rounds before that actually is my favorite pick of Sam's, and it's Austin Hooper. Austin Hooper at the 10-9 spot was, I think, a steal. Hooper was on Sam's team last year. He was able to get him back as a backup after Ingram. But if Ingram isn't healthy again like he was last year, Sam was one of 2 teams that had tight end points over 10% of his score last year. And all of that was from Hooper. So I think that for the system that Sam likes to work in, getting that guy back that late in draft was a steal for him. So he gets a thumbs up from me.
Yeah, my only question with Hooper is just if he's going to be as productive in Cleveland as he was in Atlanta. But
yeah, that's
the talent is definitely there. It's more so just is he going to get the touches that he did? But hopefully he does.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. But let's go to Lucas. John, let's have you get your thoughts on Lucas's draft.
Yeah, I really liked the Cortland Sutton pick in the 2nd round, which was actually Lucas's first pick that he had. And I went back and forth on this one and kind of thought it might be a little early, but I just feel like Cortland Sutton is really destined for a breakout season. He obviously last year started to break out, and I really do feel like he could be, potentially even like a wide receiver 1 by the end of the season. So I think that was a great pick. I'm kind of surprised that he didn't go off the board before guys like Robert Woods or Terry McLaurin, but Lucas took advantage and picked him up. The worst picks for me in my mind for Lucas was within 3 rounds taking 2 quarterbacks who are both, at the tail end of their career. Yeah. Matt Ryan, I think, is still going to be productive, but if you're going to draft a backup for Matt Ryan, I definitely wouldn't be taking Tom Brady, a guy who's even older than him. And also just using those really valuable 4th and 6th round picks for 2 quarterbacks. I think he probably could have found a better piece somewhere in there, maybe a better running back or a wide receiver that was still available. Overall, Lucas's draft I think is fine. I'm not really a thumbs up or a thumbs down on this draft. I don't think he made his team better or worse. I think that going into the draft, he had one of the better rosters. I think he's kind of positioned himself the same way after the draft. So I'd give him a medium thumb.
All right. So Lucas for me gets a medium thumb as well. I was going to say the same thing. Tom Brady in the 6th round, after drafting Matt Ryan in the 4th. I think Tom Brady in the 6th in a vacuum in this draft actually would be a pretty good pickup. But looking at the rest of his draft, looking at who is still on the board around that pick, you have like Jerry Jeudy, I think Chase Edmonds. Chase Edmonds is already off the board, but you have like Deebo Samuel still on the board. Like there's people that are going to play as much on that team as Tom Brady, but are going to be positioned to potentially be, actually playable rather than having to have this weird Matt Ryan, Tom Brady debate every week. Yeah. But the best pick for me for Lucas was the 11th round, John Brown in Buffalo. Obviously with the addition of Stephon Diggs there, probably not as many targets as he got last year, but with Stephon Diggs there, he might get more open with more coverage going towards Stephon. So I really wish I would have been able to snag John Brown in the 11th round myself. I think that's a great pick, and I think that he could slot in really well if he continues to be productive like he was last year. But overall, I kind of agree with John. This is sort of he had a solid set of keepers going into it, and he got his quarterback back that he had dropped after KEEPERGATE. But I definitely think that he's in a position to be a middle of the pack team. So he gets a medium thumb for me. Noel.
Okay.
All right. Okay. The first thumbs down. I love it.
As you guys mentioned, he had great keepers, and on paper, it seems as though Lucas, like you could argue he had top 3, top 2 keepers in the league. And I think Lucas really diminished his chances this year with his picks. As John mentioned, his best pick was Cortland Sutton at pick 14 overall. And Devin Singletary in the second round, that's not a bad pick either. But he, the 2 quarterbacks and 4 and 6, that definitely doesn't help his cause, especially as you guys mentioned. They're respectively 35 and 41, I believe. And so it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. But yeah, no, I don't think Lucas, and we can quote him, he doesn't have a strategy. And I think that shows. So he gets a thumbs down for me.
All right. Let's move on to Zach. Let's have Noel go first this time.
All right. Well, Zach, he does get a thumbs up. I think he did a great job, whether it be the amount of picks that he had or just overall. My favorite pick of his, gosh, it's hard to say for me, but I like Cam Akers. We don't know if it's going to be running back by committee there or not, but with Cam Akers, he's got so much potential. And I think he's going to be able to show Sean McVay the amount of energy and production he can bring to the offense. And that's kind of what they need, especially after last year. And so as I said, Cam Akers is my best pick for Zach. My worst pick for Zach is Josh Allen. I don't like him as a quarterback. He's shown talent. He's able to run the ball. So he's going to be able to get points that way and whatnot, but his accuracy is just not there for me. I don't think he's going to be able to produce as much as you hope, but we'll see what he's able to do for Zach. But overall, he did a good job.
Yeah, I agree. I give Zach a thumbs up. I'm going to focus on one section of the draft that I thought Zach did really well. I think his 7th through 10th and 11th rounds were phenomenal. I think Zach clearly went into the draft having a plan that he wasn't going to take a kicker or a defense until those last 2 rounds. And he had the restraint, even after watching a bunch of the top defenses go off the board. He held off, and holding off and just taking a okay defense like New Orleans, who's actually probably underrated. Getting a defense like that allowed him to make some really good picks in those 7th, 8th, and 9th rounds where defenses were going off the board. Emmanuel Sanders, Sterling Shepard, Kerryon Johnson, all guys that have a lot of experience who may not be extraordinary producers, but are definitely good bench players to insert into the lineup in a bye week. So I think that was a phenomenal section of his draft. I agree with Josh Allen being the worst pick of the draft for Zach, but for a different reason. I like Josh Allen. I just think 3rd round might have been a little early. I personally wasn't targeting. I mean, I was one of the other 2 guys in the league who needed a quarterback going into this. And on my draft board, I wasn't thinking of even picking him until like the 5th round. So a little trigger happy for me. But I think it's still a good pick. And obviously, just like I think I said with one of Tony's picks, if he ends up producing and ends up doing what he's supposed to do, then it's going to look like a great pick in hindsight. So yeah, overall, thumbs up for me, Zach. Great draft.
Well, I gotta just be honest. I'm really loving my draft. I'm looking at this board and I'm going, let's go. I'm excited for this season. I think that my worst pick out of this whole thing was I'm not thrilled that I had Tariq Cohen and Kerryon Johnson on the squad this year. I wish I was hoping for better running backs in the draft. But with who I had as keepers, the likelihood that any of them play even more than 1 week is pretty low for me right now. So I'm not too worried about it. Cam Akers is obviously on there as well, and I love Cam Akers. I think he's going to be a star for the Rams. Josh Allen maybe a little trigger happy, but I really didn't know with Tony being before me again that he would make it back around to that 4th round pick that I didn't have. So it actually would have had to be back to the 5th round. True. And that was just I thought of the value I was going to get out of any of those guys at that place, I was going to take them.
The controversy earlier in the day definitely contributed.
Yeah, the KEEPERGATE. KEEPERGATE.
KEEPERGATE will be
watching you people. But my favorite pick is Emmanuel Sanders in the 7th round. Yeah.
Really?
You know that Drew Brees likes to throw the ball. The second receiver in New Orleans always ends up in the top 24. I'm pumped for that. I think that, with Hopkins and Lockett and DJ Moore, the likelihood that Emmanuel Sanders becomes a week-to-week guy is not extremely high. But I think that if that trend of the top 24 receiver in New Orleans continues, he could become a really solid flex player, and I'm really excited for that, especially at that value.
Could be phenomenal trade value too.
Exactly.
Like you mentioned, you don't really need wide receivers in your lineup. You got great wide receivers, so it could be good trade value for someone who has an injury or something too.
Absolutely. I'm really pumped for the draft, and I'm excited for the season. I'm giving myself 2 thumbs up.
Okay.
All right. Let's go to John. I'll go first with John here. So John is one of the few teams in the league, it seems like, who didn't have weird pick shenanigans going into this draft. And there were a lot of pick shenanigans going on. So just looking straight down the draft board at John's team, there's a lot to like in this team. And I mean, I hope that it works out for you. I'm going to give John a thumbs up on this. And my worst pick for John, it has to be the 8th round pick of Matthew Stafford. I'm one of the guys over the years who has moved very far away from drafting a backup quarterback. I think that there's always enough talent on the waiver wire that in your bye week for your starter, you can pick up a guy that's going to work. And Matt Stafford seems like a waiver wire guy to me. Granted, I don't really like Matt Stafford as a quarterback, so that's probably contributing as well.
Yeah.
But I guess with Scam Newton potentially in New England, I understand why you felt like you had to do it. My favorite pick in the draft for you, John, has to be AJ Green in the 4th round. I think that's an absolute steal. If he's healthy, he's probably one of the best receivers in the league. And even though he's playing for Cincinnati, he's got a rookie quarterback that's going to be looking for experienced guys to throw to. And AJ Green is going to be that guy. And I love that pick. So thumbs up for me, John.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with the Matthew Stafford. That was definitely the pick I regretted most. I think going into that round, I saw 2 quarterbacks go off the board pretty quickly. And with potential Scam Newton, I did want to lock down a backup. And the one guy who I was really targeting, and we'll get to why I like this pick so much later, but the one guy who I was really targeting in this round was Christian Kirk, and he went off the board 2 picks before me. And after that, I just kind of panicked. I panicked. I didn't see anybody else around that I liked, looking at the other picks that came off the board, close to that were Sterling Shepard, Joe Burrow, who I was considering as a backup. So it's just kind of a panic move to take Stafford. I definitely wish I could take it back and, just get a skill position player. I agree. I feel like he's probably a waiver wire talent guy. And then in terms of my best pick, I also agree. I think I would broaden it even to say that it was not just AJ Green, but Brandon Cooks as well. I think that Brandon Cooks is a guy who is either going to be the number 1 or number 2 guy in Houston with Deshaun Watson, who loves to throw the football. The other guy is Will Fuller, who, when he's been healthy, he's been one of the best wide receivers in the league. But he has incredible injury issues. Obviously, Brandon Cooks, Thomas concussion thing, whatever. But I think Brandon Cooks has potential to kind of be that steady Eddie guy on Houston, get a lot of touches, a lot of receptions. So I really like both those picks in the 4th and 5th rounds. Biasly, I'm going to give myself a thumbs up. Go ahead, Noel, criticize me.
Sounds good. John, my favorite pick of yours, we talked about this last night, was your 6th round pick in Cam Newton. We all know that the Patriots offense is hit or miss. As we saw last year, their defense got Swan 25% of his points, which is unheard of. But I think they're going to be able to unlock a lot of new and potential game-changing plays with Cam Newton as quarterback. He is the exact opposite of what Tom Brady used to be, and the defenses are going to have to prepare so much more for them. And so that's my favorite pick. You snagged him right before I wanted him, and so it's makes me a little upset. But
that made me really happy when you told me that, because I thought I might be reaching a little early for him, but that made me so happy when you said that. I was like, yes.
That was definitely my favorite pick of yours. Your worst pick, in my opinion, was Antonio Gibson. Although AP did leave, I just don't think drafting the rookie running back for the Washington football team, I don't think that was needed in the 2nd round. You probably could have got him in the 3rd, whether or not you wanted Waller or not there. But for me, I didn't understand that pick. We didn't really talk about it, but that's just my opinion. But overall, I think you get a thumbs up. You've really filled in the gaps that you needed after your keepers. Having 3 running backs and 2 receivers, you really needed that quarterback. And I think getting Cam Newton in the 6th round was a great value as you're able to back up your bench in those first 5 rounds. So well done, sir.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to Swan. Noel, go for Swan.
Oh boy, where to start with this guy? I think Swan's best pick for me was his 4th round pick in Julian Edelman. As John was mentioning, a steady Eddie for the Texans. I think Edelman is going to be that steady Eddie for Cam Newton in New England. Being 34 years old, he's been in the offense for 10 years, I think. And so I think he, working with Cam Newton this offseason, I think he is going to be his go-to. And I think Edelman will be getting plenty of receptions and plenty of opportunities when we start tomorrow. His worst pick for me, I think CeeDee Lamb, as John was mentioning, he's got great potential as a rookie receiver, but I think the 5th round is a little bit early to draft one of them, especially when he's the 3rd receiver in the Cowboys offense. This might give him more opportunities as Cooper and Gallup might be covered more than him, but I think the 5th round was a bit of a stretch, although we did see 2 rookie receivers go before him in that 5th round, him being the 3rd one. But overall, I mean, he doesn't get it bad. He doesn't get neutral. He's like between neutral and good for me with his draft. So there you go, Swan. You're better than average.
All right. That's great. All right. So I'll go for Swan here. Brennan came in with, I think, the set of keepers that I both would love to have and would hate to have. That it just, I look at his keepers and I look at the names and I'm like, man, I would love to have any of those guys on my squad. And then I look at them together and I go, I don't know if I want that set going into this draft. Dalvin and Drake both being kind of injury prone, Mike Evans being streaky, Odell dropping off to nothing, and Russell getting older. It just, going into this draft, there was a lot on Brennan to really make that team formidable again. So with that in mind, I'm gonna give Brennan a thumbs down on this draft. I think I think that his worst pick was in the 3rd round with Rob Gronkowski. I just don't see that pick working well. I'm really low on Gronk this year. I mean, with a year off, maybe he's healthier, but I'm not big on that pick in the 3rd round. I think it was a big reach. And granted, a lot of tight ends were going off the board, so he had to make a choice. But that actually brings me to my favorite pick of his, which was in the 9th round, which was Mike Gesicki. I think that is an excellent value for a tight end that in a lot of draft boards was rated, at least for what we were looking at, probably would have been a 6 to 8 round pick, and he was able to snag him in the 9th. I think that's an excellent value, and I hope that there's enough there for him to be able to sort of back up some of those high talent but injury ridden players that he has on his team. But unfortunately, I don't think that it is quite gonna be there based on who he drafted. He only drafted 2. He only has 4 running backs on his team now. He only drafted 2 and the first was Raheem Mostert, which is great, but the next was Matt Breida, and I don't think that this is a good draft for Brennan.
Yeah, I agree with elements of both what you're saying. In terms of the best pick, I agree with Noel. I think Julian Edelman, selfishly, for me, was his best pick. I was absolutely taking him with the next pick. I was ready to click the button. That was definitely the most sad I was about a pick happening before me. I wanted them so bad because I knew I was likely going to get Cam Newton later in the draft. I always like having that wide receiver to quarterback duo, especially.
At least you didn't panic after Edelman went off the board.
Yeah, okay. For Brennan's worst pick, it's not really about the guy. It's a 2nd rounder for Marquise Brown. And I'm going to touch on what Zach said with his 2 running backs being injury prone and just a little bit of question marks with Drake and Cook. If I had Brennan's roster, I think I would have taken 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds. I like the pick of Mostert. I think I would have went with Gibson or Singletary or Dobbins with his next pick. And especially because he does end up taking Edelman and Lamb later in the draft, and he already has 2, solid talent guys. Who knows if they'll produce. But, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like Noel. I think this is an above-average draft. I definitely don't think it's a bad draft, but it's that that one little hiccup of not taking another running back in the second round, to me, is what pushes it away from being a great draft. And I agree with Noel. It's just above average. I think Zach's being very harsh for some reason, but that's fine.
I'm big on needing enough running backs to do well. Brendan doesn't get it's all right,
Just
calm down. Everybody. Let's move on to Thomas. Thomas made some moves right before the draft. I think going into the draft, you guys will discuss, Thomas had probably consensus bottom 3 keeper level talent based on what he had when that segment aired. But with some moves right before the draft, he was able to get James Conner and dump off T.Y. Hilton instead. So he did have a 2 running back set going in. To do that, though, he was able to move up in the draft to that 3rd spot, and he lost out on any 2nd or 3rd round picks and got 3 4th round picks instead. And I'll go first on this one. Thomas, your worst pick was that first one that you traded up for. Mark Andrews at the 103 spot. When you already have Travis Kelce on the squad, it is baffling to me when there was, I think, 3 top-tier wide receivers still available in DJ Moore, Juju, and Calvin Ridley. It just does not track to me why you had to trade up to get those. I know you traded to Sam versus Lucas for that 1st-round pick, so it's all in one. But Mark Andrews there, Thomas was the top tight end point getter by having a 2 tight end set last year. So we'll see if it works out for him again this year. Mark Andrews is supposed to have an amazing year, but just looking at the team, not taking a receiver there was just not a smart one for me. However, I will say that his best pick, at least for me, was Christian Kirk in the 8th round. I would say Christian Kirk is probably the number 2 guy in Arizona right now. And getting him all the way down at 8, the 8.4 spot is just, I think, a great value. And definitely a pick that I was hoping he was still going to be available three later for me instead of Sterling Shepard.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree with the Andrews.
And Thomas gets that.
I totally agree with the Andrews pick. But if it were me, like you were saying, target wide receiver, for me, Thomas had to get a running back in the 1st round because his 2 guys that he does have, obviously the trade, he got Connor, but the 2 guys that he does have are still low-end running back 2s, in my opinion, in Bell and Connor. He just had to get one of those top running backs. So seeing guys like Akers and Mostert, maybe they would have been a little early for most teams in that 3rd position, but I think for what he needed, especially with the foresight that he wasn't going to have any picks until the 4th round, it had to be a running back for Thomas. So Mark Andrews is a big question mark for me there. And then the other question mark, Greg the Leg in the 6th round. I know, it's probably kind of part of the bit, but Thomas needed a good draft. Like he mentioned, he didn't have a very strong roster going in. This would be a pick that would make sense for a team that's kind of showing off, like maybe Noel. He's gloating about how good his team is, that he can take a kicker in the 6th round. I don't know. I mean, Thomas is a guy who likes to make jokes. And
he's a jokester.
He does some bits every once in a while. So I think this was one of them. Maybe just not the best time. And then Zach, you stole my best pick for him, Christian Kirk. Another guy that I was targeting in the exact same round. 2 picks later, I already talked about it, with it kind of being the reason why I ended up with Stafford. I think Christian Kirk, I think he's going to have a good season. I don't know why. It's just a gut feeling. I think Kyler Murray is going to make big steps. So I think that he could benefit from that. Overall, I'm going to have to give Thomas a thumbs down. That combination of his 3rd overall pick and taking a kicker that early when he had much bigger needs, for me, it wasn't a great draft for Thomas.
Noel, what you got for Thomas?
Thomas. No.
That was a good fake.
You faked me out.
As both you guys mentioned, the Mark Andrews pick, like, I understand, as Zach was mentioning, that he had the 2 tight end system work for him last year. But when you got Kelce and you have other needs that you need to fill after your KEEPERGATE scandal, you don't need Mark Andrews with that 3rd overall pick. I just don't know what you're doing, my guy. Overall, I like the 4th round, having the 3 picks there, it wasn't bad. You got Tyler Boyd, who has a chance to have a great season. I think he's had 2 1,000-yard receiving yards at back-to-back seasons. So he's got potential. But that being your second wide receiver, that's just not good. You had plenty of other options in that first round, and you just threw it away. Whether that be because you wanted Mark Andrews, because as John was saying, you're a jokester and whatnot, but he just down.
Right. All right, let's move on to Drew then. Drew had probably the most shenanigans of picks and where he was drafting from out of everybody. Let's see. I think he had half of his picks in a different spot than his actual drafting position.
And his first pick wasn't even until 20th overall.
Yeah, and he didn't get a pick until the 20th overall spot. I'm looking at Drew's team here, and I'm not a fan of it. I'm really not a fan of this draft. So it's one of these. It's a thumbs to the side and kind of down for me. So obviously he made the choice last year to get rid of his number 1 overall spot, where he would have been able to grab Cam Akers if he had wanted him, where I was able to grab him. He got rid of his 203 spot to go to Tony to get the 20th and 21st spot and then bump up in some later rounds. The draft strategy was probably fine with the picks he had. I just don't like where he was picking from, is what it comes down to. And then I know that Drew was really thrown off by Latavius Murray going so early in the 3rd round that I think he made a bonehead move to spite Sam and take Phillip Lindsay in the 4th round. First overall round last year, falling all the way to the 4th round this year was crazy. But Phillip Lindsay in the 4th round has to be the worst pick, in my opinion. I think that's about 1 round too early. Drew would have drafted at the start of the 5th round. I think he easily could have grabbed him there. But that's my opinion. Since Sam didn't have a pick after him, he easily would have been able to snag him still before Sam had an opportunity to. I think that was a reach. But his best pick was, I think, BC Johnson at the 8-3. That he ended up dropping right after the draft. But a lot of what's coming out of training camp is that BC Johnson is lining up in the 2 wide receiver sets as opposed to Justin Jefferson. So the fact that he dropped him right away is bananas to me, because that's a guy who I think is going to be a sleeper this year for the Minnesota Vikings. But yeah, one of these guys. I just didn't like the draft strategy about all the pick trading. John?
Excuse me. Yeah, BC Johnson, I think a little Minnesota bias there. Obviously, he's getting a lot more of the news, you and Drew, getting a lot more of the local news referring to the Vikings. I personally hadn't heard anything about BC Johnson. Sorry, I hadn't heard anything about BC Johnson, but I think that was kind of a question mark for me. His best pick, it was worth the wait, in J.K. Dobbins. He had to wait all the way until the 20th pick for his first pick of the draft, and I think it was a great one. I'm shocked that J.K. Dobbins fell that far. Yeah. I think that he is lightning in a bottle. If you look at previous Ohio State running backs, Ezekiel Elliott obviously being the standout guy, I think that J.K. Dobbins is a guy who probably is going to take the starting job by like week 8 and potentially even sooner. Mark Ingram, I think, is fine, but I think he's more of a product of that system. So I think J.K. Dobbins is really gonna pay dividends for Drew this season. And then the other pick that I also liked a lot, but not my favorite, was Jarvis Landry in the 4th or 5th round. I thought that was great value as well. For me, the draft for Drew, I would also give a medium thumb. The Phillip Lindsay kind of spite pick definitely sours it a little bit for me. Okay. And then BC Johnson, like I said, seemed a little early. So I'm definitely not giving it a thumbs up, but it's not a bad draft at all. It's, it kind of did what he needed to do.
Noel?
I want to apologize. They are weed whacking outside, so if there's extra noise, that's why. But yeah, I think John and Zach, I think you guys both made great points. My favorite pick for Drew was J.K. Dobbins and Jarvis Landry, as John was mentioning. I was really hoping Dobbins was going to fall to me at pick 23. Unfortunately, I had to take Gallup. Tough.
Yeah. You hate to see it.
I know, you hate to see it. But J.K. Dobbins, that was a great pick. I think he was rated like 23 overall or something in the draft, which surprised me a lot because I think he has the potential to take over Ingram. As John was saying, he's lightning in a bottle, and he's got fantastic potential coming from Ohio State. and being behind Lamar Jackson, you never know what's going to happen. My worst pick for Drew was Phillip Lindsay and BC Johnson. Like, you drafted BC in the 8th round, you wasted a pick, and you dropped him right after the draft. I mean, we can argue that it's the 8th round, and so at that point, it's just you're going to be dropping and adding players week to week anyway. But I think Drew mentioned after the draft that he took Phillip Lindsay in the 4th round just to spite Sam anyway. And so I think Sam was able to get in his head, and I think that kind of ruined Drew's 4th round. But
it kind of makes it
overall,
my pick,
Yeah. He's so thrown by the Latavius Murray pick. Way too early Latavius Murray pick. But thumbs up. All right. Let's move on.
Oh, there he is. Oh.
Hi, gentlemen.
Oh, that's Mitchell. I thought that was Sam.
That is Mitchell, yes.
Hi, Mitchell.
Hello.
He's drafted very nice. Thanks for popping in and looking very nice for our segment.
My pleasure.
That's all we wear around this townhome.
Let's hop over to Josh then. Josh is, I think, one of 3 teams that didn't have any weird pick trades for this year, so he was just drafting, right down the column there. John, what do you think about Josh's draft?
Yeah, right after the draft, to be frank, I hated Josh's draft.
Yeah.
It was probably the draft I liked the least amount out of anybody. After the trade with DeAndre Swift for Mark Ingram, I know that I kind of just
Todd Gurley.
I don't love Todd Gurley, but I also feel like DeAndre Swift, especially with AP coming in and Kerryon Johnson also being there, I think that was a phenomenal trade for Josh to get rid of him. And even though Todd Gurley might not be what everybody hopes he is, and he may kind of be that critical piece for Josh this season, it's going to really depend on how he plays. I do think that's an upgrade, and he really didn't have to get rid of that much. So that definitely made Josh's draft feel a little bit better for me, but I still don't love it. Mecole Hardman in the 6th round, just like we just said with Drew, who dropped BC Johnson, who was his 8th round. Josh has already dropped Mecole Hardman in the 6th round. I don't know if he plans on picking him back up. I don't know if people are putting waivers on him already. I'm guessing Noel might be. But I think, like, Mecole Hardman, I like the pick, but the fact that he dropped him already, it's really, really a sour taste. And then my favorite pick for Josh is probably David Montgomery. I think, that was a guy that he had on his roster last year, just like DJ Chark. Obviously, the injury is, is definitely contributed to him falling down the board a bit, but I think that when he comes back, he is head and shoulders above Tariq Cohen. I think that he's going to be the go-to guy in Chicago. So it's just a matter of if, or when, not if. So, I mean, we'll see. I don't know. It's risky. And that's why even like my favorite pick for draft, for Josh, it's still a risky pick. So I still got to give Josh a thumbs down, unfortunately.
Yeah. I got to agree with John. Thumbs down for me, Josh. I really love the pair of 1st-round picks, and I thought he was off to a great start. DJ Chark and David Montgomery, 2 guys on his team last year that I think in the keeper discussion, Josh was the team that got hit hardest by only having 5 keepers. I completely agree with that. So getting those 2 guys back on the team right away, excellent move. It's tough that David Montgomery's hurt right now, and that's following the Leonard Fournette issues. So I think that trade for Todd Gurley for DeAndre Swift, I think Josh is playing clearly for this year, and he's not necessarily looking for the future on that trade. The DeAndre Swift, I think, could be the guy in Detroit, but again, it is Detroit, so. Who really knows if that's even going to be worth anything moving forward. So I think that was a great trade. My favorite pick, though, is in the 5th round, Deontay Johnson out of Pittsburgh. I think we saw it with Juju when Antonio Brown was there. The 2nd guy in Pittsburgh is so productive. And Deontay Johnson being that wide receiver 2 there. If Juju's getting the coverage, Deontay Johnson's going to be the guy that Ben will be able to throw to, and I think that'll be really useful. My least favorite pick it's got to be Daniel Jones. Other than the Mecole Hardman issue of dropping him right away, it's got to be Daniel Jones. Like I said earlier, not a fan of drafting a backup quarterback necessarily, especially that late. Daniel Jones was the last quarterback off the board. in this draft. He could have picked him up in the waivers probably for the 1 week he's not going to play Lamar Jackson, right? There's no need for me to not draft another skill player in that 10th round as opposed to Daniel Jones is never gonna be in instead of Lamar Jackson unless it's a bye week, in which case you can pick someone up that bye week. So unfortunately not the draft that Josh was hoping for, and it's got to be a thumbs down for me this year.
For me, I don't know if I'd give him a straight thumbs down. It's definitely below average for Josh, especially after what he was able to do last year in the draft. I thought I don't know if he was distracted or whatnot, but it felt like after the first 2 picks, he kind of just didn't really care. Like you guys said, DJ Chark and David Montgomery are 2 great picks to help solidify his roster after his 5 keepers. And then the DeAndre Swift trade, that doesn't hurt either because Todd Gurley has the potential to be what he has been in the past with the Falcons. And then Hayden Hurst, he's got the opportunity to be the new Hooper for Matt Ryan. And we all know Matt Ryan loved Hooper. And so, like, the first 4 rounds, it definitely, like, started to diminish. But it wasn't terrible. But then I don't like his 5th or 6th round picks in Deontay Johnson or Mecole Hardman. You can make an argument for the second receiver in Pittsburgh, as you did, Zach. I've just never been a fan of him. I feel like he's had his issues with drops in the past, especially when he's running the deep routes. I feel like he just tends to drop the ball too often for me. But yeah, as you guys said, overall, it's somewhere down there. But my favorite pick for Josh, probably DJ Chark. I was kind of hoping he would slip to me for the 10th pick, but I'm not upset about Robert Woods, but I think DJ Chark was probably his best pick.
All right, let's move on to Noel. John, why don't you go first?
Yeah, Noel. On paper, I hate Noel's draft. But given the context of what Noel's team is, he didn't need anything. And I think, Noel, you did a great job of picking up a lot of handcuffs. I would argue probably too many.
Hey, when you got extra picks, you do what you got to do.
Yeah, you had all the picks. So obviously, you're able to take guys like Madison and Pollard. So, a little questionable for me. But again, given the context of who you had available on your roster already, I think you did what you needed to do. My favorite picks for Noel, it's got to be Michael Gallup. I love Michael Gallup is probably the wide receiver I liked the most going into this season. Very sad to see him go off the board. I think personally he's going to overtake Amari Cooper potentially for being that number 1 wide receiver down in Dallas. I know that that's not a shared opinion from everybody, but I don't know. I just have a gut feeling about this guy. I think he's going to be that guy down in Dallas, even though Amari Cooper is going to.
Yeah, there are reports that Cooper is already injured again. So
yeah. And I mean, I also like the Deebo Samuel pick. That was another highlight for me. I think that Deebo Samuel slid really far because of his recent injury, and he's a perfect fit for a team like yours and all because you don't need a wide receiver right now. But when he comes back, he's going to be the number 1 guy in San Francisco. They don't throw the ball a ton, but it's always nice to have a number 1 target. And then worst pick for me, it's just kind of the combination of all the handcuffs. I guess I would, if I had to pick one, I'd probably say Damian Harris because you already dropped him because you had so many picks you didn't even need him.
Yeah,
it's not really a bad pick. I guess it's just you really focus on handcuffs, so that could really pay out for you big time because you could have some team owners coming to you, on their knees asking for some of these guys offering loads of draft picks, and it makes me scared for your future even more. So I think, Noel, you did exactly what you had to do. For you, I would give you a thumbs up. For anybody else, I would give them a thumbs down. But given your context, I think it was a great draft.
Yeah, I tend to agree with John. I think just if I was looking at this draft in a vacuum, it would be a thumbs down for me. But looking at who your keepers were and clearly what the strategy was that you had going in of getting everybody's backup so that when guaranteed some people get COVID or get injured or whatever it is, you have the next guy up and you'll be able to get good value out of that. I think that's great. Completely agree with John. Actually, my favorite 3 picks of yours were the ones that you traded draft spots for. Michael Gallup, Deebo Samuel, and Darrell Williams being, not in your column as it is. I think, I agree with John. Michael Gallup could be, I think in a lot of other systems, Gallup would be the number 1 guy. and the fact
Well, Mike McCarthy said that about him as well. He said that he is a number one guy. So
so there you go. So I think that, you know, with Amari Cooper being there also to just take away some of the coverage, I think that is the best pick. I mean, full disclosure, was going to take Michael Gallup, and then I took Josh Allen because the next guy up. So
what's up?
You hate to see it.
Yeah,
but yeah, anybody else would get a thumbs down there, but because it's you, Noel, you get a mostly thumbs up.
Fair enough. That's fair.
All right, Noel, what do you think about your own team?
For me, my favorite pick was probably Kareem Hunt. I was very nervous he was going to go early in the draft. For me, Kareem Hunt isn't technically a handcuff just because he's so involved in their passing game.
That's fair.
He's got the opportunity to just be very active in their offense. And with Stefanski getting there, I was very worried he wasn't going to fall to me, and I needed that third running back. And so for me, that was my favorite pick, was getting him with that second overall pick. As John said, Gallup, I'm very thankful he fell to me because that really solidifies my receiving core. But for my worst overall pick, Carson Wentz or Damian Harris, that was a mistake. I thought I clicked on to draft a kicker. I don't know if I clicked to add him to a queue or whatnot, but then you guys were yelling at me that I had 15 seconds left. And so I wasn't really sure what was going on. So I just had to click on somebody really quick. You know, it was the 11th round pick, so I don't really care. But yeah, I don't know. For me, I think I give myself a thumbs up just because, as John said, like these names, there's a lot of handcuffs, a lot of backups, but I don't need starters at this point. I got the three that I need in Woods, Hunt, and Gallup, and then getting Samuel in the 7th round. That was huge because he's only a sophomore. He's got plenty of time. And who knows, maybe he'll be a keeper next year. We'll see what happens.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to my guests for joining me today here on the Armchair Experts. I appreciate your insights, and we'll catch you next time.
Watch out for KEEPERGATE.
KEEPERGATE. All right.
All right.
And let's get into the matchup. The first matchup for week 1 is Sam versus Zach. The Gluten Freaks drafted from the 4th position this year, and despite ranking 6th in the team draft going into week 1, is coming in with a vengeance after missing playoffs last year. Losing out on that playoff spot because someone, Josh, couldn't win against John in the last stretch, and losing the tiebreaker was definitely tough for this team. But hopefully the pair of first-round picks of DJ Moore and Cam Akers will help get some momentum for the team. The Gluten Freaks face off against Sam this week, and Zach has an all-time record of 8-5 against this team owner. Zach is clearly hoping to capitalize on that historical record and play with some strong opening strength in this week 1 matchup. Drafting from the 2nd position, I apologize, is Sam Olson's Google team names. The story of this draft is due to KEEPERGATE. Sam was the only team who kept only 4 players going into this season. Obviously, this was a tough pill for Sam to swallow, especially because Sutton got sniped early in the 2nd round of the draft by none other than Lucas Lawrenson. But unfortunately for him, he was not able to get that player back on the roster. However, I'm excited to see who Sam picks up on the waiver wire to compensate for that. However, the trades that he did end up making, he ended up with 2 first-round picks, one from Thomas and his own. Those first-round picks for Sam were spent on Jonathan Taylor and Calvin Ridley. This dynamic duo should more than make up for losing Sutton for Sam's team. Sam is going into the season with a ranking of 9th, which is 1 position better than last year. Turns out not drafting Phillip Lindsay in the 1st round makes your team better. Who would have thought? Word on the street is Sam is coming into this season with something to prove. That the 3-time last place man can make the playoffs, potentially win a playoff game, and hopefully for him make the championship run. The Google team names face off against Zach and have an all-time record of 5-8 against this opponent. Let's move into match number 2. Match number 2 is Brennan versus Lucas. The former roommates face off in this week 1 matchup, and Lucas Lawrence's own team, the Diamond Hose, is going into this week 1 matchup ranked 7th in the league. Despite an obvious outlier of someone placing him in the number 1 spot in their ranking list. The former league champ drafted from the 3rd spot this year, but due to a last-minute trade, ended up shipping his 3rd rounder, the 303, as well as his 1st rounder off to different teams. He ended up with some 4th round picks and some 2nd round picks to help make up for that. Additionally, in that trade, he ended up with T.Y. Hilton, who he decided to keep instead of Matt Ryan in the last final stretch of the right before the draft. This makes him one of 3 teams that ended up not keeping a quarterback. However, he ended up with Matt Ryan anyways during the draft. These shifts dropped him back several spots in the draft during these trades, but his team is obviously still looking ferocious. As I mentioned earlier, Lucas was able to snag Cortland Sutton early in the 2nd round, snatching him from the Google team names after the KEEPERGATE fiasco. Sutton obviously nicely complements his Saquon Barkley-led team, and he will be facing off against Brennan in week 1. Lucas currently has a record of 4-6 against Brennan all time. Drafting from the 6th spot is team owner Brennan Swan and his team, the Spring Chickens. The Spring Chickens kept a healthy stack of keepers, including quarterback Russell Wilson. And in that 1st round, he snagged a desperately needed running back, Raheem Mostert, to join Dalvin Cook and Kenyon Drake, 2 guys who have been prone to injury in the past. Bringing a bit more running back power to the team, somewhere that he really needed to build from last year. Keeping Mike Evans was also a choice that was made by the Spring Chickens. A little bit of a risky move given the new quarterback situation in Tampa Bay and the streaky nature Evans has had for this team, but he was definitely one of those players that you just have to keep. I personally am very much looking forward to the return of a champion in Brennan Swan's team. Brennan faced off against Lucas and is 6-4 all-time in those matchups. The next matchup we have is Thomas versus Josh. So drafting from the 7th spot is former champion Thomas Strawn. The tight end heavy team last year took again another tight end in the 1st round, taking back Mark Andrews with the 3rd overall pick that he had from Lucas in a trade. Thomas had the most tight end points and the most percentage of tight end points last year between the stack of Kelsey and Andrews, so it's no surprise that he wanted to get those points back on the squad this year. However, despite that big tight end pickup in the 1st round, Thomas is still ranked 8th going into week 1. This past week, a few big contracts went to the Don't Suck Please keepers, Deshaun Watson and Keenan Allen, however, which should be good for his future value. Luckily, due to some trades, James Conner was able to join the squad as well as a keeper right before the draft, helping bolster Le'Veon Bell in what was a running back light team. Don't Suck Please faces off against Josh, where he has an all-time record of 0-1. Drafting in the 9th position is Josh Polingo, with his team not trading Lamar, which so far is exactly what he has done, unfortunately for me. Josh, hit me up. Give me a trade for Lamar. In his first 2 picks, Josh was able to snag DJ Chark and David Montgomery, 2 players who were on his squad last year and unfortunately did not make the keeper cut. But he was able to snag them in the late round of the 1st and the early of the 2nd round. Unfortunately, star running back on not trading Lamar, Leonard Fournette, is no longer running behind elite SJU grad Ben Barch in Jacksonville and is instead signing with Tampa Bay and will be splitting time with Ronald Jones. To make up for this, Josh traded with Tony to get Todd Gurley, the lead back in Atlanta, on the squad. And a quick pickup on the waivers, Josh was able to also get Brian Hill, Gurley's backup, in case Gurley's known health problems pose too much of a risk. The 2nd place team from last year faces off against Thomas, where he will face him for the 2nd ever time. In the 4th matchup today, we have John versus Drew. Drafting from the 5th spot was team owner John Stevens, who made several trades over the past few months, getting his team and draft in order for this past Tuesday. Led by a pair of Packers, John also drafted Pittsburgh wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster in the 1st round of the draft. John is hoping that first round pick of Juju, followed by a second round pick of lead Washington football team back Antonio Gibson after a surprise cut of Adrian Peterson, will be the perfect pair to take him to victory this year. What he described as the best, second best batch of keepers, hopefully this will be a good round out for him. John is one of 3 teams that did not keep a quarterback, but was able to pick up former quarterback for his team, Cam Newton, in the draft. And pretty late, too, I might add. John obviously will be hoping that he doesn't return to Scam Newton form that he's had in a few previous seasons in New England this year. He faces off against Drew in his first week and has an overall record of 4-4 all time against him. Drafting from the 8th position is Drew Mahold, who made the choice last season to trade away his first round pick for a player he ended up trading away. He instead had to wait until the end of the second round after trading away his early second round pick, and was not able to make a pick until the 20th pick of the draft. In that first pick for the Gruesome Grinders, he took J.K. Dobbins at the 210 position. Hopefully for him, that decision to trade away his early picks will not come back to bite him later in the season. However, he does still have Patrick Mahomes, in addition to Adam Thielen, Alvin Kamara, and Austin Eckler, which that Dobbins pick will be a major boost to this team as he goes into week 1 and looking for a strong performance in this first Thursday night game. Drew faces John for the 9th time since he has joined the league in week 1. And now, let's go over to the Pong Stars Game of the Week. Pong Stars Game of the Week this week is between Tony and Noel. Drafting from the first position this year was last place of the regular season, Tony Townsend. The Fresh Prince of Hilaire. No. He changed his name to KEEPERGATE. Team owner Tony Townsend took the original namesake of his team with that first overall pick this year. However, in the post-draft rankings, despite that first overall pick, team owners ranked Tony Townsend 10th. Only 0.1 points behind Sam Olsen's Google team names, but I guess that streak of first pick overall, they're a little wary of that for Tony. However, hopefully for Tony, the electric rookie that he took in that first pick, the Clydesdale, will be an integral part of the team moving forward. Rounding out that team was a solid set of keepers led by veteran Drew Brees, and definitely not Josh Allen. We will get to see the rookie Hilaire in the first game of the season on Thursday night as the Chiefs take on the Texans. Last year, Tony started the season 0-6, so even one win in the next 6 weeks will be a better start for this team. Good luck to Tony this week as he faces off against Noel. This week, returning champion team, the Revengers, have their banner-raising party as they face off against Tony Townsend, their biggest rival from the previous year. The champ from last year had the 12th and 13th pick this year and snagged Robert Woods and Kareem Hunt at the turn of the first and second. He also managed to get the 303 in addition to the 310 and 401 for 5 very early picks, where he grabbed Michael Gallup, Zach Moss, and Tyler Higbee to support his amazing set of keepers in Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, Dak Prescott, Michael Thomas, and Tyreek Hill. We're definitely looking to this squad for what should be another bombastic season for this team. Looking forward to this matchup of the week as we see if Tony will be able to dethrone Noel or if Noel will be able to start off with an extremely big start like he did last year. That's all we have for this week on the Rathole. Follow us on Twitter, Brennan, at FFL Pong. I'm your host, Commissioner Zack Eichten. And remember to vote.